I start, I also would like to thank Daphne and the other organizers on behalf of the Lieber Institute. It's been really interesting and useful conference so far, so thanks. And it's really nice to see all the students here today. Having said that, I'll just give a quick disclaimer. I'm speaking on my personal behalf, not on behalf of the US government or the Lieber Institute moving forward. As Lori said, my talk is following on from hers, so I'm moving back to law of armed conflict, and she set the stage with a number of very interesting challenges, laying them out, and I'll focus also on military objectives, proportionality, and precautions, but in light of the information and knowledge that is required. And one of the things that really struck me when I was reading your book, Daphne, is what you call the unknown factor, and how little we know underground, and what does that mean for our legal obligations and specifically for knowledge and information. And this also came out yesterday a lot in the talks, not in a legal sense, but just how much or how little information there is about what's going on underground. So having said that, the question I have is what does this mean for the law? The fact that it's hard to assess the level of threat, it's hard to identify targets, it's hard to assess what the possible consequences are for the civilian population and for civilian infrastructure. And is the law adequate? And I know some of you weren't here yesterday, but there were some different views yesterday as to whether the law is or isn't adequate. I think, in my view, in terms of this, the law's requirement for information and knowledge, it is adequate, and I'll dig a little bit deeper into the requirements. I think the law is flexible enough to deal with these challenges. They are challenges, though. I'm not trying to understate them. So some of the questions are, how much information and knowledge do commanders and those carrying out attacks have to have before launching an attack? A number of these things Lori referred to as she was going through the different principles. Is the requirement for knowledge, is it relative? Like, if one state has a lot more technical capabilities, do they have a higher requirement, similar to the precision missile debate? What about, is there a difference between dynamic and deliberate targeting? So for those of you who don't know, would be deliberate targeting would be targeting where you have a lot longer to plan who your targets are, whereas dynamic would be, you're in a conflict and it's on the spot. How certain do you have to be about the information you have? In the underground context, how much extra effort, given the lack of information or the difficulty in getting the information or impossibility, how much extra effort do commanders and others need to spend to get that information? And does the requirement depend on what rule we're talking about? Is there a difference if we're talking about military objectives or proportionality or precautions? So to move on to the law, my structure mirrors Lori's in terms of military objectives, proportionality, and precautions. So for military objectives, you need information to know if something is a military objective, and we were discussing yesterday how you detect tunnels, so that's a very basic area you need information. I think that in terms of nature, location, purpose, or use, when we talk about purpose or use, you might need there's a few extra layers here. And for purpose, it's about the intended future use of an object. So how certain do you have to be about that intended future use? Some people say a lot of people would say it's reasonable certainty. Can't be hypothetical, can't be based on a worst case scenario without enough facts. It's more than just speculation, but you do not need certainty. You can't have certainty about intended future use. So that's one area. Another is use, and I think that Randy yesterday talked about, in case of doubt, the presumption of civilian status, especially for persons. For objects, I think it's a little bit different because the way the law reads, there's some, if you follow that if you believe there's a presumption, or in case of doubt for objects, it would be when an object is normally used for civilian purpose, or normal use is civilian purposes, but is it in this case used for military purposes? So you could think of like a subway would be civilian use, but it could be used for underground warfare. And additional protocol 2 would say if you have doubt, in case of doubt, you should presume that it's a civilian object. Not all states are party to AP1, so there's some room there. And in that case, the ICRC commentary says even if there is only slight doubt, which it should be presumed a civilian object. The UK manual would say substantial doubt would preclude an attack, and a lot of states have different formulas for this. I think one of the points I want to make here and throughout is that while there might be agreement on extreme cases on both ends, there's a lot of different, in the gray areas, there's a lot of different interpretations. And another question I have is there a different standard for persons or objects? I think there is, and there is a debate on persons. The US, for example, has a very different view than the ICRC on whether, in case of doubt, whether somebody is a person, which Randy talked about yesterday. And then you have dual use. Now, dual use objects are military objectives, but there will be issues for proportionality and information. And before I go to proportionality, I just want to talk about the types of information that could be required or that are required. So the types of information are relative to the capabilities of the actor. You can't be required to do, to use different technologies if you don't have them. The information should be reliable. It should be made, the decision should be made in good faith. And recently there was an article about a year or two ago by Professor Michael Schmidt suggesting that the greater the value of the target, the more uncertainty that you could have in an attack. I think it might be a controversial proposal, but it's an interesting article. The other area for military objectives is military advantage. You need information to know Lori talked about a concrete military advantage and the definition of a military objective. So you need information to decide if it's a concrete military advantage. And I know, you talked about what segment of the tunnel. Daphne, you did also in your book. And I'll jump back now to other qualities of information. It should also be credible. You have adversaries who want to give false information. There are different ways information might not be credible, so the actors should check that. As many sources should be verified as possible. It should be timely, quality, and really important is it's information that's available at the time. So it's really easy in hindsight to say, oh, you should have known that, but it's at the time, and this is one area where the dynamic and deliberate targeting comes in. I think there's could be a difference between them. When you have more time to prepare, you can get more information. And then there is the issue of knowledge and decisions. The general standard is that of a reasonable commander. It's debated what's the degree of certainty that a commander should have in making the decision or those carrying out attacks. I think certainty is misleading because you don't need certainty. The conflict allows for mistakes. So it's just where along that spectrum. And it's always based on the information available at the time. And here too, I think a point I want to make is the law, it's vague and that can be frustrating, but it's also its strength. It's flexible and it was designed to be flexible in order to accommodate different situations. The fact also that it's debated, I think, gives room for interpretation. So moving on to proportionality, Lori mentioned what that rule is, balancing, does the anticipated military advantage outweigh the expected civilian or damage to civilian objects or civilians. So here too, it should be beyond mere speculation, reasonable commander standard, reliable information. There's some people who say in cases of doubt, it's a different threshold than for military objectives, and there should be more certainty for this. We can debate that. And I'll move how much time? Okay. And then we have precautions, which I want to spend a little time on. So precautions would be, there's an obligation for constant care. Commanders and others should do everything feasible to verify the target is a lawful military objective. The means and methods of warfare should be used that can cause less harm to civilians, if it's feasible. We should refrain from launching attacks if we expect it to violate the principle of proportionality, and then warnings, which Lori mentioned. A lot of these require information, and I want to point out the word feasible here. Feasible is generally meant to mean practically, I'm trying to remember it, practicable and practically possible, which comes from the UK manual and also the statement upon ratification. And what Lori mentioned this, like, what if you can't get information underground? Does that mean we need to change the legal requirement? I don't think so. I think the legal requirement is broad enough. We might need to get more information about the underground, which I know, Daphne, in your book, you recommend having an expert in the decision-making process, or if I'm correct, please.
I think that's not going to help necessarily to gain more information. This is more about sharing like the complexity and the secondary threat and stuff. But the information, I think, might be actually unavailable.
I mean, and maybe I don't know enough about underground warfare, but maybe there is a burden to try to get more. I mean, if we think of CDE assessing collateral damage, and militaries look at what is the blast radius, what is the effect in the weather conditions, in the that building structure. Maybe we need to know more about that for how weapons underground, how do they react, what is the potential damage in that civilian area. But I don't think that changes the law, I guess, is my point about that. So I think that might be an area, and I mean, yesterday it was really interesting with Lieutenant Colonel Ite's talk about the developments in how to detect the tunnels. So it's possible to get more information. How much, I don't know. So that might be an area, but I don't think it affects the law itself. And I think the law is the law is meant to be flexible. It's meant to be enduring. It was actually made at a time when we didn't have as much information available as we do now, more than we do have for underground. But
I think the problem is now we expect it to get information, and there might be environments where that expectation doesn't hold true, exactly like you said, like it used to be, right? That there was no information, so we need to accept that certain environments, the information cannot be expected to be available.
Yeah, I agree, and I still think it doesn't change the law. I think the fact that there's debate in different level, how much certainty, what types of information can be used in terms of how this requirement is interpreted. The vagueness also gives room for interpretation. The textual nature of the law allows it to adapt. It's always based on the circumstances ruling at the time in a case-by-case basis. And I also think, sometimes it's pitted against, these rules are pitted against the military advantage or the military necessity. I think that, like, listening to the talks yesterday, but also they're not always against each other. Militaries want to have information to know where to detect the tunnels, or I think, as you might have said yesterday, you want to make sure that whatever munitions you're using doesn't harm your own soldiers. There's also the battle for the hearts and minds. This is outside of the law, these things. So I think there can be compatibility, not always, of course, but I think it's useful not to think of them as opposed from each other. And then lastly, I think it's always important to go to basic principles, as Lori was saying, and the law is based on military necessity and humanity and the balance. And so there's there might be a bigger threat, and the military necessity issue might be heightened, but as we've been talking about, when we have tunnels and urban conflicts, so too is the threat to civilians and civilian infrastructure. So it's always necessary to keep that in mind in balancing it. Thank you.